All right, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out to go over our webinar today. I've got Jigar Patel, the co-CEO and co-founder of NorCal Cannabis Company. Jigar, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Sweet, man. Thanks for having us. Looking forward to it.
All righty, and you got Mike Howard here from Fohse. I am the Cultivation Liaison, and we're going to be going over some of NorCal Cannabis's cultivation results using the Fohse A3i system, and exactly how they were able to dial in this system to achieve some of the incredible results that we've been seeing. All right, we're going to go over and highlight some of the yield results from 3 of their harvests. We've got the top quality flower per fixture and also the total sellable weight. So Jigar, do you want to kind of go over how those break down as far as the top quality flower and then the total sellable weight numbers as we go through these slides?
Yeah, sure. When we think about top quality flower, it's really about, flower that we can actually use in products. So A's, B's, and smalls that go into either bulk pounds, but mostly for us go into our branded pounds. We grade that on quality, which we can get into later. So the total sellable weight includes also trim. That metric doesn't mean as much on the West Coast states. But when you start getting into a lot of the other states where biomass really does come from the indoor, you start to understand what that total biomass number is really important elsewhere.
Absolutely. All right, so one of their first harvests into the A3i system, they were able to achieve 115 grams per square foot of quality flower and 159 grams a square foot of total sellable weight. And as we progress, you can kind of see these numbers are pretty consistent. In May 25th, we had a harvest of 6.03 pounds a fixture, or 114 grams a square foot, and 149 grams a square foot of total sellable weight. August 3rd, we got 97.48 grams a square foot, or 153 grams a square foot of total sellable weight. So Jigar, can you kind of go through as we progress and show the differences that strains make and just running those high quality cultivars that we see kind of in the California market?
Yeah, look, I mean, California, like everyone knows, is pretty finicky, and the consumer is definitely educated, and we can't just get away with selling anything. So, for a company the size of ours, we have to be able to grow a lot of different cultivars. And so, as we tried the Fohse lights, we had to make sure we could grow, almost anything under those lights, and the results we weren't getting were just, moonshots. So, again, what we've done for the last, call it year and a quarter, year and a half, is try and run everything we can through the Fohse systems, monocropping them. These rooms are showing monocropped mostly, but then we also try to see what would happen if we use different types of plants within our system. Something we don't do very much with our HPS rooms, but we wanted to make sure before we switched over to all LEDs, that we had a real understanding of what the lights were capable of doing and what it meant to our system more than anything.
Definitely. So it's not just Blue Dream you guys are running over there, correct?
No, I mean, I think we're known for a lot more besides Blue Dream. To be honest with you, man, I don't think I've run Blue Dream in
Very nice.
15 plus years.
She used to be a good yielder. All right, so kind of got into this in the last slide, but with those amazing yields, how about the quality? So let's kind of go over some of your COAs from those harvests. All righty. So it looks like you guys are running some, pretty high-end strains over there: peanut butter souffle, slurricane, and jealousy. So upwards of 31% THC that you guys hit in jealousy here, with 35, almost 36% total cannabinoids, which is extremely impressive. On your slurricane, you're almost upwards of 3% terpenes, which is extremely impressive as well. Can you kind of break down how you guys were able to achieve those awesome yields while still maintaining, a high total THC, high cannabinoid profile, and also hitting some really nice terpene levels as well?
Yeah, I mean, look, when we think of just indoor farming in general, right, it's really a function of making sure we give the plant its best environment to thrive in. So, I don't think we're specifically doing anything other than providing the best environment and steering the crop towards its best expression, right? The genetics should be speaking for themselves. There's nobody at NorCal that is above and beyond the plant. But what we've been able to do, once we've got our hands on these lights and then kind of really honed in on all of our other inputs, is really help show the best expression of these plants. When you start seeing numbers like this, it really is telling you you're getting the most of what you want. So you've got yield and quality showing. And if you look at all three of these strains that we did, all three of these, go into our highest margin, highest branded, high-end products. So, we like the quality coming out of there.
Very nice. So you guys provided a very nice home for these ladies. Let them do their thing. So what do all these results have in common? They were all grown by NorCal Cannabis Company, and they were all grown under the Fohse A3i high-intensity LED system. The case for high-intensity LED is more light is essential for greater yields. So Jigar, you guys had a very good environment. You guys were killing it under HPS. Can you kind of go over the fact that how was HPS a limiting factor in your guys' setup? And then how is the Fohse A3i system kind of able to mitigate that being an issue anymore or a limiting factor?
Yeah, I mean, and I think we'll get into crop steering here in a little bit, but ideally, we've been crop steering for quite a while, and the guys that we've been working with that really broke down the basics for us and showed our team and helped us understand what we've been doing for years, but really didn't have a good handle on. As we understood it, light was actually the limiting factor in these environments that we had dialed in early on, because the theory was if we could get more light, we would be able to actually up the yields, and dial in VPD, obviously, that help the plants perform really to their utmost, right? Just giving them an environment to make them thrive. So the theory always was with HPS, could we raise the light intensity, from 1,000 ppfd, that we were getting with our HPS lights to somewhere between 15 and 1,800. And quite frankly, the limiting factor with HPS was heat. You couldn't get that high. The lights couldn't get that low without really affecting the plants by burn. So, when these high-powered LEDs came along, we thought, this might be our shot to take that risk and see if we could, change the environment by starting with upping the light intensity and then, using that same kind of science, adjusting the environment and the VPD to let the plants thrive. And, what we thought was going to happen is what we're seeing today.
Nice. So more photons, less heat, and you guys were able to push the plants a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, and look, it's not. I think we all are aware it's not just the lights, right? There's a lot of different factors, but I think
100%.
when you get to indoor ag, I think what you realize is the limiting factor most of the time, and if you're building a system correctly, should be around that light.
Definitely. All right, we're going to go over how more light equals greater yields really quick. Some of these huge cannabis plants grown in Northern California under the sun, we're taking a DLI of 60 to 65. So cannabis can take an extremely high amount of photons. The one thing that we do lack outdoors, though, is the control that we're able to get indoors. So by pairing those high light levels with more control, we're able to have amazing results with really good quality as well. All right, here's another study that kind of highlights more light equals greater yields by Yubin Zhang, the head of environmental sciences at University of Guelph. The gist of this study is that dry yield inflorescence increased linearly with increasing canopy level, ppfd up to 1,800. So this kind of shows you can still maintain good quality with those higher light levels. And we've linked a little link down here if you want to check it out yourself. All right, and one caveat that Jigar kind of highlighted is that the window of success under high intensity LED becomes more narrow. So their crop steering, they're kind of dialing in their environment with their VPD extremely accurate. So you have to make sure kind of everything is in line to have this much success and have a completely dialed in room. So one of the things that our customers typically do is what we like to call power ramping. So these are high intensity LEDs, and you don't always need to be blasting them at 100%. So typically we show that you increase intensity as you go up into flower, and then you'll start to decrease typically around the end of the cycle. Jigar, can you kind of go over what you guys have been able to do as far as power ramping goes?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to stick plants that are coming in under traditional lighting right into something at 1500 or 1800 ppfd. Although, we've thought about seeing what would happen. I think we're not ready to test that yet, but we switched over to some LED veg lights that actually get our plants to about 900 ppfd before we switch them in. So right away, we kind of start between 1150 and 1200. And by day 6 or 7, we're up to 1500, 1600 ppfd.
Very nice.
Pretty quickly. In the later stages, depending on what the cultivar is and what we're doing, it'll determine how we push it at the end. But generally speaking, we'll start to lessen that the last, call it, week or so of the plant's life.
Okay. And what have you seen as far as just kind of overall light intensity that most of the cultivars that you run have been able to take?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think with anything that we've done in our Fohse rooms, we've ever run the majority of the flowering cycle at less than, call it on an average of 1400 ppfd. But typically we like to run these, and we put them up to 1800. And again, I think you're hitting on this slide, or the previous slide, is you have to be really dialed in with everything you're doing to be running at that light intensity and to make sure you get quality product, right? If you're just going for a straight yield, I think you can run at 1800 ppfd and achieve pretty outstanding yield. But I think, in California, we have a different metric we have to live up to, which is making sure you're not just putting out maximum yield, but you have a product that differentiates itself from, the beautiful mixed light flower and even outdoor that's available in California. If you're doing indoor here in California, it has to stand out as AAA.
Yeah, great point. Results in greater system efficiency equal more bang for your operational expenses. This comes down to the nature of how diodes operate. Diodes run at their least efficiency at max capacity. For example, let's say you have an 800 watt and a 1500 watt fixture, and you're putting 800 watts of power through both of those fixtures. The 800 watt fixture will have a lower system efficacy at 800 watts than the 1500 watt fixture being run at 800 watts because the diodes in the 800 watt fixture are running at max capacity, whereas the diodes on a 1500 watt fixture is being run just over 50% capacity. Running a high intensity fixture at a fraction of its capacity will actually increase the lifespan of the fixture and slow degradation of the diodes as well. Results in greater system longevity equal more bang for your capital expenses. So one of the great things about the Fohse A3i is you don't have to chase the canopy. So there's no lifting up LEDs or putting them directly to the canopy. It kind of reduces the labor that you're going to have, and also is great because of the optics that light has, right? So you can see some other LEDs without optics, and that light is kind of thrown out everywhere. The Fohse A3i, it's really narrowed down to the canopy, and that makes sure that the penetration is very good and light isn't being thrown everywhere that's not being used.
Yeah, I think angling the Fohse fixtures is something our guys like to tinker with, and it's great, right? You can really concentrate the light where it needs to be. You're not overlighting places that don't have plants. So we like that function of the light. Yeah,
that is a great function. Thanks for bringing that up, because the Fohse A3i, the footprint can kind of be manipulated, right? If you want to run through your room and make sure that you have uniformity and you dip off a little bit, it just comes down to tilting one of those light bars here, tilting another one there, and then making sure you're uniform where you want to be uniform. No chasing the canopy. So operators of underpowered LED fixtures must keep the fixtures 6 to 12 inches above the canopy at all times. As the plants mature and grow, the fixture must be constantly raised through harvest to have adequate PPFD levels. The more fixtures an operation deploys, the more logistical challenge this practice can be. Another factor at play here is the lensing. Most of these underpowered fixtures are lensless. Without lensing, the small amount of light these fixtures do put out is dispersed in all directions, diminishing what falls on and through the canopy. High-intensity fixtures that deploy lensing can use much less electricity to direct photons down on the canopy, which equates to labor savings. Hey guys, if you want a copy of these slides that we went over or any of the COAs, please head over to Fohse.com and request them. Thanks. All right, so next up, I'm going to do a quick Q&A with Jigar before we open it up to the audience for their own questions. And just to refresh you guys on NorCal setup, you can see kind of the parameters they were able to achieve these results with below. All right, question number 1. So NorCal works with some of the foremost pioneers in crop steering. What does crop steering mean to you, and how have your cultivation... All right, let's start that one over. Question 1. NorCal works with some of the foremost pioneers in crop steering. What does crop steering mean to you, and how your cultivation operates?
Yeah, I mean, crop steering is a word that's been used quite a bit lately, and I think everybody's using it as they should. I mean, to us, at its core, crop steering is really managing plant growth through both irrigation and the climate and environment. Manipulating these aspects really allows us to control or steer the plant towards vegetative or generative growth, really optimizing the expression of that plant. This was something when, we brought in some guys that work with us internally, years ago that we were doing under HPS lights. And, so we've been at crop steering for almost 4 years, right? So when we first started doing it, it was something that we were hesitant of because it was used in, big ag, cucumbers, tomatoes. Nobody had really been doing it in cannabis. You didn't really have the technology, but as more and more technology became available to the cannabis folks, we learned crop steering under HPS and realized, one of the limiting factors for us was light intensity because of the heat that was coming off of HPS lights. So, for us, the natural move was to figure out a source of more light. And once we brought more light, we realized there were a lot more other problems we would have to deal with to actually dial this in. So it's been a learning curve, but, we really enjoy the science of crop steering. I think all of our cultivators have really took to the science and understand it. And it's something that we hope to continue to transcend with. So we're excited about what we do here.
Very nice. And that leads us kind of into our second question. So you just went over how you were crop steering under HPS, and then when you switched over to LED, can you highlight a few tips for growers in the same situation? Did you have to feed a higher EC when you switched over? More irrigations per day? What are some of the tips you could provide?
Yeah, and so like I said, right, when we put these in, light was the limiting factor. So once you eliminate it as the limiting factor, we had to adjust everything. And, it's been a work in progress. I'm not going to tell you on day one we figured it out. I think for us, immediately what we saw was we had to raise the temperature a little bit in the rooms. So there was definitely a bump in temperature. I would expect people to realize that, your rooms are going to run a little bit hotter. We raise the EC depending on cultivar, and we're looking for the plant to react, and we'll make adjustments, but from anywhere from 15 to 30%. And obviously the irrigation strategy changes. And for us, like the irrigation strategy, it's not plug and play, right? Like we understand what to irrigate with at what time to force either vegetative or generative growth. But, utilizing these lights, changing the environment gives us different feedback. So obviously, our lead cultivators are looking at this data and then changing their irrigation strategy based on it. It's not one simple answer. And so, if folks think that they're just going to plug these lights in and then utilize the same strategy, they'll probably get better results, but they also risk, really hurting their crop if they're not paying attention and understanding that they have to change some things.
Yep, 100%. Always an evolution.
Yep.
All right. Can you describe some of the challenges and learning curves you've experienced when dialing in your cultivation environment to a high-intensity LED system? What sort of process did you implement to adapt? So I think you kind of highlighted that in the previous question as well.
Yeah, and I think, look, the thing that you're going to get, right, is I really look at these lights as the next evolution in indoor horticulture. I mean, I remember, if you remember the transition from single-ended thousands to double-ended thousands and what that jump in learning curve was like, it wasn't that much of a learning curve for a lot of folks. That light intensity in itself helped a lot of people. This is really next level. And I think what this gets back to is the design, right? Traditionally in indoor cannabis cultivation, people haven't really built systems that work together. And so now that you're really dialing in these systems, you don't want to have, your dehumidification working against your air conditioning, working against your lights, working against your fans. So you have a lot of these disparate systems working against each other in the old designs. Designing new facilities with these lights, you actually want systems that can handle, we found the biggest problem to be for us, because we are throwing so much more yield into a room. There's so much water being thrown up into the air that we don't have a temperature problem, we don't have a light problem, but we have the dehumidification problem. And I think that'll be the biggest shock to a lot of folks, is when you start operating at this level, controlling your humidity is really something that you have to pay attention to. And so for us, one of the biggest challenges is like, shit, how many dehumidifiers can we add to this system that was never designed to get here? And, a crazy story is we've been designing a new build, and, it took us like 2 months of trying to convince engineers that we were really putting this much water up in the air, because nobody believed us.
And that's what we see a lot kind of when transitioning over, right? You're going to need more dehumidification, but just how much you'll need depends on how hard you're pushing those plants as well, too. You guys have been able to achieve those high yields, and obviously the plants are going to be transpiring like crazy when you're really dialing in that system. All right, the A3i is capable of some of the highest PPFD levels of any fixture on the market, and also comes pre-programmed with 3 distinct spectral choices. Will you describe your lighting protocols with the A3i system? So kind of how did you cycle through the spectrums? And you kind of already alluded to how you power ramped up and down throughout the cycle with intensity.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll be pretty clear. It's like, we like all of our cultivators, me included, we love the functionality of that. But I'll be honest, because we haven't been able to just put it to one specific cultivar and do it multiple times, we haven't been able to really dial in how much of an actual difference it makes from an output standpoint. From a quality standpoint, we definitely like toying with kind of that spring, summer, and fall light. So changing that variability does give our cultivators a little bit of it. I think, as we progress over the next year and we collect more data on more rooms, we'll start to see what it actually does from an output standpoint. But I think from, the plants being happy and walking into a room and recognizing it, I think they really do like that change in light.
Awesome. All right. Question number 5. When aiming for higher yields, do you deviate from the VPD charts towards the tail end of flower to mitigate any molds, microbes, pathogens that may kind of arise with those higher yields?
No, I mean, I think what we do is make sure we are within the VPD chart, right? And I think that's really important, is making sure you don't deviate, making sure you're there, and knowing when you've pushed enough, and honestly knowing like when to harvest correctly. I think sometimes people pick either too early or too late. And again, if you have your VPD dialed in and you've done everything correctly, you should be okay. But look, again, when you're growing plants that are that big indoors, there always is that possibility. So like a lot of things I've alluded to, like operating with this type of equipment is not for the faint of heart. It's for people that really understand what they're doing and want to be professional about it.
100%. All right, so here's a topic that's always differing. How do you grade and allocate your flower and sellable weight?
Yeah, great question, right? I think as cannabis has evolved, I can remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, a bulk pound was a bulk pound. And over the years, and especially with the onslaught of, rec in a lot of states, the consumers become more aware of what they're buying, and they really understand what they want. And so, for us, we grade the plant consistently throughout its plant life. Certain strains are grown for certain brands that we have and have a different focus. But at the end of the day, the way we grade the plants is we're always looking for top quality flower and A buds and B buds, which is basically, let's call it the top 1/3 of the plant. And then the bottom 2/3 generally gets sorted out and sifted out. Now, the difference with the Fohse lights is we're not seeing that much of a difference between the top of the plants and the bottom of the plants. Really, we are seeing pretty big size flower, throughout the canopy. So for us, from that perspective, we're getting a lot more of like real usable flower. But, for us, because we grade on quality and consistency for our brands, we're constantly grading out flower between, what we call AAA tops, the middles, and then smalls. And each of them serve a different purpose in our regimen. And that's different for everybody, but we pay a lot of attention to it. Something unique for us, though, is because we do grow such high potency strains, our sugar trim and our leaf is very, very high testing from a THC perspective, which makes great for, biomass use or even rolling into actual smokable flower.
Yeah, and it looks like, even from some of the pictures that we see in these slides, you guys have, upwards of 4 feet of production as far as flower goes there. So the fact that you're able to get those high quality flower even that far into your canopy really shows something.
Yeah, no, it's really amazing to see.
All right, so have you adjusted how you source genetics since changing over to high intensity LED? We typically see people, it's almost like re-hunting your genetics, right? You're going to have different expressions under LED compared to HPS. Can you kind of walk us through what you've noticed, pushing the plants to greater light levels, as well as that transition from HPS to LED and the genetics that you run?
Yeah, we're pretty calculated about the way we test stuff. I think the first things, when we were deciding what strains to put in, is we wanted to make sure kind of our power strains, that have been kind of the backbone over the last year, were something that we could still do. So, at first we were testing out the gelatos, some of the exotics, the cereal milk, and we found that we were actually able to achieve flower production levels that were 30% greater than what our HPS top level producing rooms were. And then something, that the market is always asking for and is sativas. And, one of the things that is an advantage we haven't really talked about with LED lighting is, can you really manipulate both the veg and growth cycle with higher light to push the plants to speed up their life cycle? And, we haven't seen too much of it, but we're starting to see a little bit of that. And which led us to, try sativas, and the sativas really do take off in those rooms. So, I think one of the things that we've done over the last year is make sure, not why we can't, we grow over 50 different cultivars at any one time here for our product lines. What we try and do is take a good sample size and run them through our Fohse room to make sure everything's ready for it. So far, there doesn't seem to be anything that we are not happy with running through those rooms. And again, it goes back to really making sure the operator isn't the problem.
Yep, that's huge. All right. So it's no secret that high intensity premium LED fixtures come with a high cost. How has this investment positively impacted your bottom line?
Look, it's really simple for us, right? Yield basically translates to bottom line for us. And so for the ability to get 30% more flower, especially in a market like today, which is super tough, right? We have price compression not only hitting California, but price compression hitting the entire country. At the end of the day, those that are able to be more efficient, win the space. Now, look, you look at the price of a Fohse light, and it can be a turnoff, right? And again, like, you got to think of it in terms of time and ROI. And I think we believe, like, if you're doing this correctly, your ROI on the lights themselves are probably one harvest. And if you have to change up your HVAC and do a little more upgrading to really do it, you're probably looking at 1 to 2 cycles. But, given kind of where the industry is today, if you're not pushing towards these levels, you start to see, and you're seeing fallout today, right? Like, people have to be more efficient. And look, it's going to be demanded of us, right? Like, at some point, just it's no secret that there's a lot of power being used for indoor cannabis. So
Yep.
again, the more efficient the operator, I think the more of an argument you can make that you're actually providing quality cannabis in a controlled environment more efficiently by utilizing these lights.
Yeah, great points. All right, I think we're wrapping up here. Before we get into the Q&A that we're going to open up to everyone. So the California cannabis industry has faced recent economic hardships, rising taxes, wholesale price drops, and wildfires. What are some of the most impactful ways you've stayed profitable and prosperous? It's almost like you knew that question was coming.
Well, we get asked that question every day, and we totally get it, right? Look, again, it's no secret, and I think everybody understands California is the most competitive market in the world. Mm-hmm. Not only are we dealing with a robust, I would call it legacy market, traditional market, but you're also dealing with some of the best, most successful indoor cultivators to have ever existed. There's a lot of respect amongst all of us for each other. There are people that are really, really good at their craft. I think we all are driven by the fact that, like, we're California guys. We've seen this industry flourish here. This is why a lot of us moved here, was for this industry. And so granted, it might make sense to be in a bunch of different spaces or different states. Participating in this market is where I think people on the cutting edge want to be. And that being said, while we won't be as profitable as some of our counterparts in other states, I think this is where you are to transition and really, be at the front lines of what's happening here. So that being said, like, we got to be on our game, and there's a lot less room for error for operators here. And so everything we do is really focused on, making sure we're profitable, but also making sure we're transcending the space, that we're cutting edge of the space, that we're bringing new genetics to the table, and that we're leading the way, as California has for decades. So, long-winded question is, yes, it's not that profitable here. The answer is, it's not as profitable as it used to be. Competition's hard, and everybody's got to do things to be better. And again, the low-hanging fruit for us is, can we get more yield? Because it does take some of the pressure off some of the other areas where, in an industry like this, where you try and cut costs, there's only so much you can cut that affects it. And again, like, the best bang for your buck is actually getting more out of your production. Yep.
Great points again. All right. Question 10. California has passed green energy legislation banning the sale of HID lighting. You saw which way the wind was blowing and upgraded your facility before 90% of your competitors. What other trends, green or otherwise, are you keeping your eye on?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're watching everything, and in today's age, let's be at least cognizant of what's happening with the environment. So, especially here in California with the drought. So I think a lot of things that we're looking at is water reclamation, making sure all the water we're pulling out of the air is actually being run back through our systems, utilizing any runoff, doing as much as we can now, I think, to focus on water conservation. And obviously that does come with crop steering and the ability to not overwater plants. So, I think that's really understated, as people don't understand how much less water we're using the more we're dialed. But that being said, there's a lot more improvements, and we're working on a lot of stuff in our next generation build that's going to save a lot of water, and really have almost a net zero water effect.
That sounds awesome. All right, so you run one of the most successful brands in California. What would you say you're most proud of in your business?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if you ask anyone, we talk about NorCal or our brands, it all goes back to cultivation. We're extremely proud of who we are as cultivators. We're extremely proud that we've been able to transition from the legacy traditional market into what cannabis is today. And I think we're proud that we've been able to learn from folks and not have our egos attached to being, who we were 10 years ago. I think if you look back at cannabis and cannabis cultivators, there's a lot of ego based on, well, I had a green thumb, or my system was better than everyone's. I think what we realized is everybody had a pretty good understanding of what was happening. And over the last 5 years, we've really been able to dial in what's happening both at the environmental, leaf, plant, and root level within cultivation, and it's data that's actually helping us understand the science, and through that we're able to change how we cultivate, how we operate, and make better choices. So I think the thing I'm most proud about, beyond the people that are part of our business, the team we've built, is our ability to continue to transcend what we're doing. We're really excited about what we do here. I think the team takes great pride in seeing the results that we're getting, and I think that's what drives us every day.
Very nice. Yeah, and that's where it all starts. I mean, cultivation, and you guys kill it there.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
All right. So now we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. All right, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out to go over our webinar today. I've got Jigar Patel, the co-CEO. How's it going, Jigar?
Good, man. How are you? Thanks for having us.
Doing well. Yeah, thanks for your time again. All right, we've got some pre-selected questions we're going to go over real quick first, and then we're going to jump into some questions from the audience. All right, so just one quick question. Did you try any other LEDs before switching over to Fohse, and what kind of pushed you over the edge to choose Fohse for your building?
Great question. I was thinking about this today on my way in. Our first experiment with LEDs was in 2015. We had walked into a 2000 light grow that we took over that was some, I want to say, foreign knockoff LEDs. And at that time it was a scrog. And what we noticed then was, the quality of the flower was great. And the scrog system obviously is it's not a very dense canopy in terms of height. And what we saw, really quick there was that there really wasn't much volume to it. And so we walked away from LEDs. And I think what happened to us was as we kind of progressed, and it's a big shout out to Josh and Ramsey who've helped us along the way. They convinced us to try LED and veg, and we saw the difference of what was happening in our veg plants under LEDs, and that was really what convinced us to buy into flowering LEDs again. And from that we tried a couple different versions. When we found with the Fohse that really kind of beyond the results that we were getting was the ease at which we were able to transition into them, right? I mean, essentially once and obviously in bigger facilities you got to make sure you're structurally sound to hang a light like that, because it's a heavy fixture. So, for us, when we compared, we'll call it the two most powerful lights, the transition of just swapping, Fohse on a light per light basis or just redoing the grid made it a really easy retrofit, and so that was really one of the more appealing things for it early on.
Nice. And then from a commercial perspective, have you noticed a significant difference in quality and subsequently price in LEDs and traditional HPS lighting?
It's funny, right? Because when we started this, you got to understand NorCal is made up of a lot of folks that come from the legacy industry. These aren't growers that just got taught how to grow. Like you're talking about, 15, 20-year industry veterans that just in themselves convincing to switch to LED was a problem. And what we did, is when harvest results were pulled in and we were running side-by-side rooms of other HPSs, we are not only running tests, but we were having our own guys try and figure out the difference, and not very many could tell the difference. And quite frankly, when we put LED products into our branded products, there isn't a difference based on LED versus HPS, and it still maintains our quality grading. So from a price perspective, we haven't seen anything, and I think from a quality perspective, we're seeing exactly what we need to see.
Very nice. And then just kind of wrap up, and then we'll jump into the questions from the audience. And I think you highlighted this a little bit earlier, but what was the biggest adjustment you had to make in environmental systems when you switch systems?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it again. These are all retrofits, right? And I think that the technology of the lighting is so impactful on what you're doing that it really does change almost everything you have to do from an operational standpoint, from just even how you manage your environmentals. But the biggest hurdle we've had to deal with is that our plants are transpiring so much that nobody believed that we could ever pull out. There would be that much air to actually pull out, water to pull out. And we've never been able to really dial in the dehumidification. And I think now that we've, changed the limiting factor from light, our new limiting factor is dehumidification. So anything we're building now, because it's not a retrofit, we can actually kind of build up, and we're actually building the specs because we believe we can potentially do greater work once we have that control.
Very cool. All right, let's jump into some of the questions from the audience. So I'll just jump into the first one. The model of light used was the A3i, correct, Jigar?
Correct.
Okay. And then can you talk us through a little bit about, were you running 8-week cultivars, 9-week? How long was your veg time? Did that change at all throughout systems, or was it pretty consistent?
Yeah, no, great question. Right. And I go back to our earlier experiment with the veg lights, right? And so we know the difference between vegging under metal halides versus the LED lights we've been using. We were able to speed up our veg time over the course of, call it 18 months, from 21 to 28 days to 14 to 17 with LEDs. So we know that was something we were able to do during veg. Now, I don't know if we have quite figured out exactly what that means to us with LEDs, because we're really pushing the envelope in terms of understanding what we're doing first right now. I think, over the next year, we'll start to toy with intensity and seeing how we can really speed up that flowering cycle. But that being said, total time in a full LED system for us here is between 9 and 11 weeks all in. So veg and flower.
Okay. And then did you try any different elevations for the lights? And if so, did you notice any negative effects? And I think this comes down basically to light levels you're trying to achieve, right? And uniformity. So can you kind of walk us through how you trialed that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, just again, basically, right? Like, HPS, you can get upwards of that 1,000 ppfd, but again, what you get associated with that is heat, right? So, which is why people are constantly moving those lights up and down. I think with the Fohse, because of how powerful they are, you're able to get to that 1,800 ppfd, the top of the canopy, pretty easily, and still keep, I would say, at 3 to 4 feet and achieve that. I think the real thing that you should be looking at is, when you start getting into the aisles, right, and you start getting down into your canopy, what are you seeing? And our guys are constantly testing that. And if it's just clear aisle space, you're seeing like, 1,100, 1,200 ppfd, like, 2 feet down in an aisle, which starts to tell you what's happening in that environment.
Yep. And did you change up your nutrients or kind of your EC when you started hitting light levels over 1,500 ppfd?
Yeah, look, all of your inputs are going to change, right? Again, just think of this as the total equation. Your major input of light change. So now, the plant is starting to work even more optimally. So, EC is 15 to 30%. Again, our guys are feeding, monitoring, and understanding it. But from a straight nutrient standpoint of like what the inputs into our nutrient formula are, no, we kept that the same. We bumped the EC and watched how these guys were steering.
Okay. And then what was the footprint that you were running this fixture on? Was it a 5x5, a 6x6?
Great question. And I think this speaks to why we're still so excited about the lights. The room, and see, this was a retrofit, right? So I didn't build this room specifically for these lights. So the current pattern in this room, and the best we could have got to is, I think it's like a 5 1/4 by 6 1/2. And it's just an odd size we normally wouldn't do. We've looked at designs where we think we can get on a 6x6 to that 1,800 correctly. Again, like, without knowing what we can really push these plants to, and the fact that you can dial these down, like, if cost isn't an issue and, you're comfortable pushing the levels, I think you can get away with a 5 1/2 by 5 1/2 and even maybe a 5x5.
Okay. Yeah, those are good footprints. And kind of what you highlighted is even in a retrofit, if you have kind of, spaces that don't usually conform to a traditional footprint, that having that ability to manipulate the light bars definitely comes in handy for that.
Yep.
And then can you go over, did you guys, when you were hitting those light levels, was that light at 100%? And I think you kind of highlighted in the webinar a little bit, but you typically try to reach your highest light levels, I mean, upwards of 1 week into flower, correct?
We'd like to start the ramp pretty early and move up, a couple hundred a day, but and that's really just a factor of making sure the plants root in and are ready for what we're about to put them through, right? But yeah, we'll run those things at 100%. And again, we think, again, we're still limited to what these things can really do based on, really the design of this particular room and our environmentals.
Very nice. And then someone asked, when you're talking about 1800 ppft, you're measuring that at the top of the canopy, correct?
Correct.
Cool. And then after changing over to LEDs, did you find you had to change kind of any defoliation practices when you lollipop, when you thin? Is it more aggressive, or is it pretty much standard on how you were practicing under HPS?
Yeah, I mean, it's the standard operating procedure when it comes to plant maintenance for us. The only difference is that there's just a lot more of it. So, and from a labor perspective, it does actually end up being a little bit more.
Okay. And then can you kind of go over a little bit what you guys were yielding? Because you guys were killing it under HPS too. And I want to highlight that you were achieving really good results with there too. So it's just kind of fine tuning and, pushing a little bit more light without that heat. So what were you guys achieving under HPS compared to LED previously?
Yeah, I mean, we average between, call it, depending on cultivar, 85 and 92 grams, I'd say, of HPS. And the problem with the HPS is, like I said, super powerful, but when you start pulling HPS plants at that size, you get into this really weird quagmire of controlling VPD and heat, and then the heat part of that whole equation really makes it a lot harder to kind of control that environment. So it's an even harder task, right, under HPS. Yeah, look, we're killing with HPS, right? Most people would be happy to continue seeing the yields we get under HPS. But again, and I can't state this enough, right? If you look at what's happening out there today, with all the data and all the different folks growing, like, this is becoming highly competitive. And I don't think we're comfortable resting on our laurels. And quite frankly, we think that if we don't do it, somebody else is going to. And we want to be at the forefront of that.
Absolutely. I think you guys have, proven that as well. Someone asked, you kind of mentioned crop steering a little bit. Can you walk us through, I think my light just went out. Can you walk us through like any big changes you implemented, or just any, helpful bits of advice as far as that goes?
Look, I think, again, the main thing, and I think for all the crop steers out there, is, it's not just plug and play, right? So, realizing you have to raise the temperature, raise the EC, and then you have to really monitor this stuff more than something, look, we got used to crop steering under HPS. And, like anything else that you do, hundreds of thousands of times, you can be accustomed to doing the same thing over and over again. And we had to make sure our guys were really making sure that they paid attention to what was happening, and not just on their phones and not just on their data charts, but also in the room. So I think my biggest thing to everyone is like, yeah, look, there's basic things you're going to have to do, the higher EC, and higher temps, but it's really making sure you're on top of it, monitoring, and making sure you guys are keeping track of all of the data.
Definitely. And then can you walk us through what medium you guys use? Are you in cocoa? Are you in rock wool? Have you been kind of going back and forth and experimenting with both, or?
Yeah, look, early on we were all cocoa, and then really got into rock wool. And what we realized, and especially over COVID with all the supply chain issues, is that we have to be very fluid as an organization, and to understand that, could we do this in both? And so what we do actually is give our cultivators the option, depending on what our supply chain looks like. And we haven't seen any difference in either. We don't really mess with their decision there. Some guys are comfortable with cocoa, and some guys are comfortable with rock wool on slab. Some of our guys like cocoa or rock wool into cocoa, right? So again, like we leave it up to them. You know, I look at our main cultivators really as kind of my Jedi race car drivers. You know, like these guys understand what they're doing, so we give them the tools they want to do their job.
Very nice. And I think that wraps up about all the questions. Is there anything else you want to say or kind of go over, Jigar?
No, man. Look, again, I think for all you guys that are considering using Fohse, you know, look, I was apprehensive for a long time. I've been doing this for a long time. It's really been a pleasure working with these lights because it really opened our eyes to a lot of other advances in technology. The Fohse team has been great as we've worked with them to not only kind of work through our own problems, but introduce us to other folks. You know, and honestly, it's helped us up our game. So, you know, look, I'm happy to get on here and speak to our experience with you guys. It's been a pleasure on our end. So appreciate it.
Awesome. We really appreciate your time, Jigar. It's always nice when a cultivator with your guys' experience uses our lights. It's an awesome thing to see.
Sweet, man.
All right, guys. Well, everyone take care. Thanks for joining our webinar. And just to let you know, we've got the COAs, some articles we'll link, and a bunch of other good information to come for after this. So thank you everyone for your time. Have a good day.